If you were to go to chapter 41, you would see that God's protection comes through Joseph's interpretation of the dreams and his honesty about the dreams. So his reputation had become so big that at one point, Pharaoh had dreams, and he couldn't figure out what they meant. Well, here comes this guy who has a reputation, and one of Pharaoh's people said, I had a dream interpreted by some Hebrew guy in jail one time. I think that we should call him. So they summoned Joseph to come to Pharaoh. Pharaoh tells him his dreams, and Joseph accurately and honestly, even though it's not great news, he honestly tells the truth, and he is protected. The two dreams were that Egypt will have 7 years of bountiful harvests, and the second dream was that Egypt will have 7 years of famine. So what ends up happening is that Pharaoh is so pleased at the fact that Joseph can actually know what he's talking about with these dreams, that Joseph yet again gets promoted. He actually becomes this deputy Pharaoh in Egypt, and he is considered second in charge of all of Egypt. This is Joseph, this guy that his brothers wanted to kill. They sold him into slavery. He got thrown in jail because of false accusations, but yet now he's suddenly, basically, second in command of all of Egypt. And I want you to recognize God's protection, because Joseph was now in a position to do something that anyone else in that position was not going to do. We're going to see that. But this idea of interpreting dreams is so difficult. Pharaoh had all of these people that were sorcerers and magicians and wise men that couldn't figure this out, because dreams are weird, aren't they? Dreams are so strange. Has anyone in here ever had a really strange dream before and you wake up going, what? Has anyone ever woken up and said, is there some guy named Joseph around here that can tell me what that means? No, I hope not. But dreams are very strange. In fact, there was a guy one time, he was a doctor, Oliver Wendell Holmes, and he was very interested in the use of ether. He was so interested, in fact, that he administered ether to himself to see what would happen. And right before he was left unconscious, or whatever you want to call it, this profound statement came to him. And it was so profound that he thought this was suddenly the key to all the mysteries of the whole universe. But of course, when he woke up, he couldn't remember what it was. How disappointing, right? Well, he wasn't going to be stopped. So he yet again said, I'm going to administer ether to myself. But this time, I'm going to have a stenographer there. And they are going to write down this profound wisdom that will solve all the mysteries of the universe. And lo and behold, right before he was left unconscious, this statement came back to him. He was so excited, he shouted it out, and he went under. He came back up, and he looked at the stenographer, and he said, what is the key to all the mysteries in the whole universe? And this is what he had said. The entire universe is permeated with a strong odor of turpentine. It didn't make any sense. Dreams can sometimes make no sense, but Joseph had the key. Joseph knew what the answer was. It was a warning to Pharaoh. You need to prepare. You need to plan. Don't be so caught up in all of the abundance that you forget that coming next could be hardship. And Joseph provides wisdom and clarity, and now he is second in charge of all of Egypt. So we see his protection because he trusted the Lord for those visions to be real, or those interpretations to be accurate. He was honest to Pharaoh, and we saw God's protection. But then as we continue into chapter 42 and following, we see that God has protection for Joseph's brothers because of Joseph's forgiveness. You see, there's a famine that's happening throughout all of the land. And the family needs to figure out how we are going to have food. And so all the brothers go to Egypt. They don't know that Joseph is in charge. They don't know that they are walking into, 20 years later, the very court of Joseph, who is administrating food and distribution of wealth and all of these things. They have no clue. And they go before him, and what happens? Joseph's dream comes true. They bow down before him. Now, that's not like Joseph's dream, like, I can't wait to have my brothers bow before me. This was Joseph's actual dream that he spoke earlier. It came true. They bow before him, but they don't know it's Joseph. Joseph is in a position now at age 39 to look at his brothers and say, "You fools. Do you know who I am? I'm the guy that you wanted dead. I'm the guy that you pretended was dead. You sold me into slavery. You lied to our father. How dare you come before me and ask for food?" Joseph doesn't do that. Because Joseph was so caught in the understanding of God having a plan throughout all of it that Joseph doesn't seek revenge. He forgives his brothers. I want to read to you Genesis 45, if you want to turn there. This jumped out at me because it shows that Joseph was not worried about revenge. He wasn't worried about getting even with his brothers. He was captivated by the plan of God, and he saw God's protection throughout all of these horrible circumstances to put him into a place right now where he could actually help his family, not hurt his family. He wasn't going to repay evil for evil because he knew that God was in charge of all of it. Genesis 45, verses 3 through 8. Joseph said this to his brothers. "I am Joseph." He's identifying himself to them. "Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. They were confused. So Joseph said to his brothers, "Come near to me, please." And they came near, and he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land for these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh and lord of all of this house and ruler over the land of Egypt." Joseph saw in the midst of all of the junk that was happening, and he maybe even had moved on, but now staring at him were the very people that sold him and wanted him dead. And he says, "It wasn't you who sold me. It was God's plan that I was right here because now I am in a position to help you." And he uses his position to protect his family. So we see God's protection comes through Joseph's forgiveness of his brothers. You might wonder why this whole idea of protection is so important. It's because we can get so bogged down in the circumstances of life, like Joseph could have, that we forget to remember that God is in charge, that God cares for us and he loves us. You see, the whole purpose of what was happening here in Egypt and the whole purpose of Israel going to Egypt for 400 years and it resulting in slavery, it was part of God's big plan. And you might go, that is a twisted God then who would send people into these scenarios. Let me tell you something. I want you to look in chapter 46, verses 2 through 5. You might think in the past, through our studying, that we've seen Abraham disobey. We've seen different pillars of the faith not follow the instruction of the Lord. But this was different. Israel going to Egypt was different. Chapter 46, verses 2 through 5. God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, "Jacob, Jacob." And he said, "Here I am." Then he said, "I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again." and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. God told them to go to Egypt. God said, I'm going to be with you. I am going to bring you back out of Egypt. Little did they know it would result in 400 years of slavery. And you might think, how is that protection? How is that a good thing? There were two results that I want you to think about as to why God used that time, or how God used that time in Egypt. He said he was going to make them a great nation. They came out of Egypt at the end of slavery with so many possessions. It tells us that Israel actually was able to plunder Egypt and take with them countless possessions. God made them a great nation, even though they had to endure this horrible hardship of slavery. God had this time period in mind of what to accomplish. God was working on the hearts of everyone in that area. He was driving sinners out of the promised land. And when the Israelites came back to the promised land, all of that was empty, and it was just a land for the Israelites, for God's people. He was using that time to preserve Israel and grow them. God chose that time period. He chose that plan to glorify himself. And while we may not look at it as protection, that's exactly what God was doing. He was protecting Joseph and his family. He was protecting his nation, Israel. You see, Joseph did protect his family through a famine. We saw that through that slavery, Moses eventually rose to power and leadership. We saw that God performed miracles. We did not see an absent God. We saw a very present God who was using those circumstances to grow his people. God protects. Joseph had 21 years of a very hard life, but he had 71 years of a blessed life. God took every single thing that happened to Joseph. It was part of his upper plan. And he said, I'm going to protect you and preserve you so that you will be in every position I need you to be in for the next step to take place. And you might be sitting here going, I've been through a lot of junk in my life. I got a lot of stuff going on, and I don't see how this is part of God's big plan. But it is. It certainly is. If you can read in Scripture that Joseph had all of these things happen to him, but yet his eyes continued to be on the guidance of the Lord, his eyes continued to be on the power that God has to reach into those evil situations and make it good, then no matter what you're going through, he can and will do the same. Romans 8:28 says, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. God has a plan. And no matter what we would call evil or distasteful or unpleasant, God is saying, I'm using those things to equip you, to grow you, and I am the one who is making all these things good. In Joseph's life, we saw that protection through the terrible things. Next week, Pastor John's going to focus on one verse in chapter 50 of Genesis. It's the verse, as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive. There was evil done to Joseph. Evil things from his brother. Evil things from Potiphar's wife. They were intended to be hurtful. Staring at someone in the face and intending to be hurtful to them is a horrible thing. And God says at the end of Genesis, I'm using that evil. I'm going to make it good.